The airport was bustling, filled with the usual mix of hurried travelers, tired families, and business executives scrolling through their phones. Gate 27 was no different. People lined up, eager to board their flight, while the airline crew prepared for departure. Among the passengers was Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative figure whose presence in political circles had been making waves across the nation. Clad in a professional yet casual outfit, she was used to traveling for speeches, interviews, and meetings. Today was just another flight, until it wasn't. As she approached the boarding area, she handed her ticket to the flight attendant, a young woman with neatly tied-back hair, a crisp uniform, and a forced smile. Her name tag read Jessica. Jessica glanced at the ticket, then at Karoline, and in that split second, something changed in her demeanor. "Excuse me, Ms. Leavitt," Jessica said, her voice laced with an edge that wasn't there before. "I'm afraid you won't be able to board this flight." Karoline blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" Jessica straightened her posture, her expression turning smug. "I have the authority to deny boarding to any passenger I deem disruptive or problematic. And frankly, I don't think you should be on this plane." A hush fell over the people in line as they turned to watch the interaction unfold. Karoline, maintaining her composure, took a breath. "Is there a reason for this?" Jessica folded her arms. "I don't feel comfortable having you on board. Your presence could make other passengers uneasy." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people recognized Karoline and immediately understood what was happening. Others were simply curious. But one thing was clear. This wasn't about any real concern. It was personal. Karoline kept her voice steady. "I paid for my ticket. Like everyone else. If there's an issue, I'd like to speak with a supervisor." Jessica smirked. "I am the authority here. I don't think a right-wing extremist should be allowed to fly with us." At this, a few people gasped. Others pulled out their phones, sensing that something newsworthy was unfolding before them. A businessman in line shook his head. "This is ridiculous. She has a valid ticket." Jessica shot him a glare. "Sir, this does not concern you." But now it concerned everyone. One woman nearby whispered to her husband, "This isn't right. She can't just do that." Another man, who had been scrolling on his phone, started recording. "This is discrimination, plain and simple." Karoline, sensing the weight of the moment, remained poised. "Jessica, I respect that you have a job to do, but what you're doing right now is unfair and unjust. I have every right to be on this flight." Jessica scoffed. "Not on my watch." Just then, another airline employee approached. The gate supervisor, a middle-aged woman with a firm but neutral expression. "What's going on here?" Jessica turned to her, clearly expecting backup. "I denied her boarding. I don't feel comfortable allowing her on." The supervisor frowned. "Why?" Jessica hesitated for the first time. Because she's a public figure with dangerous views." The supervisor's eyebrows lifted. "Dangerous?" Jessica doubled down. "Yes, she's divisive. I'm standing by my decision." The supervisor exhaled, then turned to Karoline. "Ma'am, may I see your ticket?" Karoline handed it over. The supervisor scanned it, then turned back to Jessica. "She's a paying passenger with a valid seat. There's no policy violation here." Jessica stiffened. "I have the right to refuse service." The supervisor's expression hardened. "Not like this, you don't." The tension in the air thickened. Jessica's confidence wavered. The watching crowd waited, holding their breath. The supervisor turned to Karoline. "I sincerely apologize for the situation, Ms. Leavitt. You are welcome to board." Jessica's face turned red. "What? You can't do that!" The supervisor shot her a look. "I can, and I am." Then, in a voice that carried across the gate, she added, "Jessica, step aside, now." Jessica's jaw tightened, but she moved. Karoline, with grace, nodded and walked toward the jet bridge. Some passengers clapped softly, a few offering words of encouragement as she passed. But it wasn't over for Jessica. The supervisor motioned for her to follow. "Come with me." Jessica stomped her foot. "You're siding with her? You're punishing me for standing up for what's right." The supervisor's voice was firm. "You're being removed from duty immediately." Jessica's face crumbled. "You can't fire me for this." The supervisor gave her a long, measured look. "You're right, I can't, but corporate can." Jessica's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was happening. Back on the plane, Karoline settled into her seat. She wasn't one to gloat, but the truth had won today. The flight attendant had let her biases get the best of her, and there had been consequences. By the time the plane took off, news had already spread. Videos of the incident had gone viral. Social media exploded with reactions, both in support of Karoline and in shock at the blatant discrimination. And as for Jessica, by the end of the day, her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. And just as the supervisor had predicted, her job was gone. As the plane soared through the sky, Karoline Leavitt sat quietly by the window, reflecting on what had just transpired. She wasn't surprised. She had faced bias before. But this time, it had played out in public, and the reaction was immediate. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Text messages, emails, and notifications flooded in. Friends, colleagues, and supporters were all reaching out. Some were outraged on her behalf. Others were simply checking in. One message caught her attention. It was from a well-known journalist. "Karoline, the video of what happened at the airport is blowing up. The airline just released a statement. Call me when you land." Karoline took a deep breath. She had expected backlash, but she hadn't expected the airline to respond so quickly. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Jessica sat in a small office, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The reality of the situation was sinking in. A corporate representative stood in front of her, looking unimpressed. "Jessica, you put this airline in an impossible position today." Jessica scowled. "I was standing up for my beliefs." The rep didn't flinch. "You were discriminating against a paying passenger for her political views. That's not standing up for anything. That's violating company policy and federal regulations." Jessica scoffed. "Oh, come on. She's a far-right extremist." The rep's expression hardened. "She's a citizen with a valid ticket. That's all that matters." Jessica's face flushed. "So, that's it? You're just going to fire me?" The rep folded his arms. "We have no choice. You acted outside of your authority, and the airline is now dealing with a PR disaster." Jessica's hands clenched into fists. "This isn't fair." The rep sighed. "What's not fair is that you put us in this position. You'll receive an official termination letter within 24 hours. Security will escort you out." Jessica's breath hitched. "Security?" The rep motioned toward the door, where a uniformed officer waited. Jessica's heart pounded. This wasn't how she had expected things to go. She had assumed she would be praised for taking a stand, that people would rally behind her. Instead, she was the one facing consequences. As she was led through the airport, people stared. Some whispered. A few even recorded. The same viral moment she had helped create had now turned against her. By the time Karoline's flight landed, the story had exploded. Major news outlets were covering it, and social media was in a frenzy. As she stepped off the plane, a small crowd of reporters was already waiting. "Ms. Leavitt, do you have any comment on what happened today?" Karoline smiled politely. "I think the situation speaks for itself." Another reporter jumped in. "The airline has officially apologized. They've confirmed the flight attendant was fired. What's your response?" Karoline remained poised. "I appreciate the airline for taking swift action. I never wanted anyone to lose their job. I just wanted fairness." The cameras flashed as reporters scrambled for more questions, but Karoline kept moving. She had a speech to deliver, and she wasn't about to be distracted. That night, the debate raged on across TV networks, podcasts, and social media. Some praised the airline for holding Jessica accountable. Others tried to frame Jessica as a victim of cancel culture. But one thing was clear: Americans were waking up to a growing problem. Political discrimination wasn't just in the media or online. It was in everyday life, in workplaces, and even at the airport gates. And thanks to one flight attendant's mistake, the whole country was talking about it. As the night unfolded, Karoline Leavitt watched the media reaction with a sense of measured calm. This wasn't the first time she had been in the spotlight, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an invitation to appear on a major news show the following evening. She knew the conversation would be intense, but she also knew this was an opportunity to highlight a growing issue. Meanwhile, Jessica sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone in shock. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments, some supportive, but most condemning her actions. Her name was trending, and not in the way she had hoped. A news segment played on her TV. The headline read, "Flight attendant denies boarding to conservative figure. Airline takes action." She watched as the anchor broke down the event. The airline wasted no time in addressing the situation. In a statement, they said, "Our company has a strict policy against discrimination of any kind. We regret the inappropriate actions of one of our employees, and we have taken immediate steps to correct the situation." Jessica's stomach twisted. She had thought she was taking a stand, but now she was out of a job and a national controversy. Her phone buzzed with a text from an old friend. "Jess, what were you thinking?" Jessica groaned and threw her phone onto the couch. She wanted to believe she was the victim here, but deep down, doubt started creeping in. Had she let her personal feelings go too far? The next day, Karoline appeared on a popular news show. The host greeted her warmly. "Karoline, this incident has sparked a national debate. What's your take on what happened?" Karoline nodded. "First of all, I want to be clear. I never wanted anyone to lose their job. But this wasn't about one flight attendant. This is part of a larger trend where people think it's okay to discriminate against someone just because of their political beliefs." The host leaned forward. "Some are saying this was just an isolated incident. Do you think it's part of something bigger?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. We've seen businesses refusing service, people being silenced on social media, and now even airlines deciding who gets to fly based on politics. That's not America. That's not freedom." The audience applauded. The host smiled. "Well, it looks like the airline agreed with you, considering how quickly they took action." Karoline nodded. "And I appreciate that. But this shouldn't have happened in the first place. No one should have to worry about whether they can travel, eat at a restaurant, or even keep their job because of their political views." As the interview wrapped up, the host asked, "What's next for you, Karoline?" She smiled. "I'll keep standing up for what's right. This isn't just about me, it's about every American who's ever been treated unfairly because of their beliefs." The show ended, but the conversation continued. Across the country, people debated whether Jessica had been right or wrong. Some praised her for trying to make a statement, while others saw her as the perfect example of why bias in the workplace had gone too far. Jessica, now completely unemployed and struggling to find support, realized too late that she had miscalculated. Meanwhile, Karoline continued her work undeterred. This was just another battle in the larger fight for fairness and free speech, and if this incident had proven anything, it was that Americans were paying attention. The days passed, but the story lingered. It was a lesson, a warning, and a turning point. And for Jessica, it was a reminder that when you let personal bias cloud your judgment, the consequences can be swift. As the days turned into weeks, the fallout from the incident continued to make waves. Karoline Leavitt moved forward, using the moment to highlight the importance of free speech and equal treatment. She gave interviews, wrote an op-ed, and even spoke at a conservative conference where she addressed a crowd of thousands. "This isn't about me," she told the audience. "This is about every American who has been silenced, denied opportunities, or treated unfairly just because of what they believe." The crowd erupted in applause, chanting her name. Meanwhile, Jessica found herself in a very different situation. Her attempts to secure a new job were met with rejection after rejection. News of her firing had spread throughout the airline industry, and no company wanted the liability of hiring someone with such a controversial past. Even outside the airline world, employers hesitated. A hiring manager at a major corporation saw her resume and immediately recognized her name. "Oh, that Jessica," he muttered, before sliding her application into the rejection pile. Desperate, Jessica turned to social media, trying to rally support. She claimed she was unfairly fired, that she was the real victim of discrimination. But the response wasn't what she had hoped for. People weren't buying it. Many reminded her that she had been the one who chose to deny service to a paying customer for political reasons. Others pointed out that she had abused her authority and was now facing the natural consequences of her actions. Her once busy Twitter account became a battleground. Supporters dwindled, critics dominated. One comment summed it up perfectly. "Jessica, you weren't fired for your beliefs. You were fired for breaking the rules and treating someone unfairly. Actions have consequences." Jessica shut her laptop in frustration. She had thought she was doing the right thing, but now she was alone, unemployed, and struggling to make sense of it all. One night, as she scrolled through job listings, her phone rang. It was an old friend from college. "Hey, Jess," the voice on the other end said hesitantly. "I saw what happened. Just wanted to check in." Jessica sighed. "It's been rough." Her friend paused. "Listen, I think you got caught up in something bigger than you realized. Maybe it's time to take a step back and really think about why this happened." Jessica frowned. "You're saying it's my fault?" "I'm saying maybe you let your personal feelings cloud your judgment. Maybe it's time to reflect instead of blame." Jessica didn't respond. Deep down, she knew her friend had a point. Meanwhile, Karoline's influence continued to grow. The incident had catapulted her further into the national conversation, and her message resonated with more people than ever before. She had turned a moment of blatant discrimination into a larger conversation about fairness, free speech, and the dangers of ideological bias creeping into everyday life. Television networks kept inviting her for interviews, and political commentators across the spectrum debated the issue. Even some liberals admitted that Jessica had overstepped her authority. One well-known journalist who typically leaned left wrote an op-ed titled, "When Did Politics Decide Who Can Fly?" In a free society, he wrote, "We cannot allow personal biases to dictate who gets to access public services. If this had been a conservative flight attendant refusing a liberal passenger, the outrage would have been immediate and overwhelming. The rules must apply to everyone, or they apply to no one." Karoline shared the article on her social media with a simple caption, "Exactly." Her supporters celebrated the win, but Karoline wasn't just focused on this one moment. She knew that for every high-profile case like hers, there were countless everyday Americans facing similar treatment in silence. She began receiving messages from people across the country. A college student wrote, "My professor failed me because I wrote a paper defending conservative values." A small business owner messaged, "I lost customers after publicly supporting a political candidate." Even airline employees reached out. One flight attendant confided, "I don't agree with what Jessica did, but I'm scared to speak up, because I know I'd be targeted." Karoline took all these stories to heart. One night, sitting in a quiet hotel room after a long day of interviews, she made a decision. She wasn't just going to move on, she was going to take action. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Hey," she said, "I have an idea." A week later, she announced a new initiative, the Liberty Project. It was a legal fund and advocacy group designed to support everyday Americans facing discrimination for their beliefs. Whether it was a student being silenced in class, a worker fired for expressing their views, or a business owner harassed for their politics, the Liberty Project would offer resources, legal support, and a platform to fight back. The response was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, donations poured in, and people from all walks of life shared their stories. Jessica, watching from afar, saw the news and felt a pang of regret. She had thought she was taking a stand, but now it was clear she had been on the wrong side of history. She had lost everything over a moment of arrogance, and now Karoline was turning the experience into a movement that was only growing stronger. The contrast couldn't have been starker. One woman had let her biases cost her everything. The other had turned adversity into a national movement for fairness and freedom. And as America watched, it became clear.